In Washington, at 4 a.m., Neil called Carolyn again in Frisco. Shortly after this, we pulled out of Washington. A cruising car overtook us with siren going, and we had a speeding ticket, in spite of the fact that we were only going about 30. It was the California license plate that did it. "You guys think you can rush through here as fast as you want just because you come from California?" said the cop. I went with Neil to the sergeant's desk, and we tried to explain to the police that we had no money. They said Neil would have to spend the night in jail if we didn't round up the money. Of course, my mother had it, $15. She had 20 in all, and it was going to be just fine. And in fact, while we were arguing with the cops, one of them went out to peek at my mother, who sat wrapped in the back of the car. She saw him. "Don't worry, I'm not a gun moll. If you want to come in and search the car, go right ahead. I'm going home with my son, and this furniture isn't stolen, it's my daughter's. She just had a baby, and she's coming to live with me." This flabbergasted Sherlock, and he went back into the station house, and my mother had to pay the fine for Neil or we'd be stuck in Washington. I had no license. He promised to pay it back, and he actually did, exactly a year and a half later, and to my mother's pleased surprise, my mother, a respectable woman, hung up in this sad world, and well she knew the world. She told us about the cop. He was hiding behind the tree trying to see what I looked like. I told him to search the car if he wanted. I've nothing to be ashamed of. She knew Neil had something to be ashamed of, and me too, by virtue of my being with Neil. And Neil and I accepted this, sadly. My mother once said that the world would never find peace until men fell at their women's feet and asked forgiveness. This is true. All over the world, in the jungles of Mexico and backstreets of Shanghai, in New York cocktail bars, husbands are getting drunk while the women stay home with the babies of the ever-darkening future. If these men stop the machine and come home and get on their knees and ask forgiveness, and the women bless them, peace will suddenly descend on the earth with a great silence, like the inherent silence of the apocalypse. But Neil knew this. He mentioned it many times. "I've pleaded and pleaded with Luann for a peaceful, sweet understanding of pure love between us forever, with all hassles thrown out. She understands. Her mind is bent on something else. She's after me. She won't understand how much I love her. She's knitting my doom." The truth of the matter is, we don't understand our women. We blame on them, and it's all our fault, I said. "But it isn't as simple as that," warned Neil. "Peace will come suddenly. We won't understand when it does. See, man?" Doggedly, bleakly, he pushed the car through New Jersey. At dawn, I drove across the Pulaski Skyway as he slept in the back. We arrived at Ozone Park at 9 in the morning to find Luann and Al Hinkle sitting around, smoking butts from the ashtrays. They hadn't eaten since Neil and I left. My mother paid for groceries and cooked up a tremendous breakfast. Now it was time for the Western threesome to find new living quarters in Manhattan proper. Alan had a pad on York Avenue, and they were moving in the evening. We slept all day, Neil and I, and woke up as a great snowstorm ushered in New Year's Eve, 1948. Al Hinkle was sitting in my easy chair, telling about the previous New Year's. "I was in Chicago. I was broke. I was sitting at the window of my hotel room in North Clark Street, and the most delicious smell rose to my nostrils from the bakery downstairs. I didn't have a dime, but I went down and I talked to that girl. She gave me bread and coffee cakes for free. I went back to my room and ate them. I sat in my room all night. In Farmington, Utah once, where I went to work with Ed Ull, you know Ed Ull, the rancher's son in Denver, I was in bed and all of a sudden I saw my dead mother standing in the corner with light all around her. I said, 'Mother!' And she disappeared. I have visions all the time," said Al Hinkle, nodding his head. "What are you going to do about Helen?" "Oh, we'll see. When we get to New Orleans, don't you think so, huh?" He was starting to turn to me as well for advice. One Neil wasn't enough for him. "What are you going to do with yourself, Al?" "Oh, I don't know," he said. "I just go along. I dig life." He repeated it, following Neil's line. He had no direction. He sat reminiscing that night in Chicago, and the hot coffee cakes, and the lonely room, and the snow world outside. A big party was on hand in New York, and we were all going. Neil packed his broken trunk, put it in the car, and we all took off for the big night. My mother was happy with the thought that my sister was moving in the following week. She sat with her paper and waited for the midnight New Year's Eve broadcast from Times Square. We roared into New York, swerving on ice. I was never scared when Neil drove. He could handle a car under any circumstances. The radio had been fixed, and now he had a wild bop to urge us along in the night. I don't know where all this was leading. I didn't care. Just about that time, a strange thing began to haunt me. It was this. I had forgotten something. There was a decision that I was about to make before Neil showed up, and now it was driven clear out of my mind, but still hung on the tip of my mind's tongue. I kept snapping my finger, trying to remember it. I even mentioned it, and I couldn't even tell if it was a real decision or just a thought I had decided to make and forgot to do. Haunted, flabbergasted, made sad, it had to do somewhat with the shrouded stranger.